Black History Month, well,
history in general. Let's see.
I think the most significant black man in politics would be Barack Obama.
My president, Barack Obama.
Barack Obama.
Obama. President Obama.
Barack Obama.
I would say Barack Obama.
I would say Barack Obama.
Well, I would say Obama.
Led the nation, is leading our nation, is making great change, standing firm in his beliefs, especially today.
I didn't think that I would see a black man in my time as president of the United States.
Probably one of the things that has had the biggest impact on me is the day that President Obama was elected. Because I, honestly, not many years before that, not long at all before that, did not think that I, in my lifetime, would see a black person elected and inaugurated as President of the United States.
Mayor Harold Washington.
He set the precedent.
Well, Harold Washington was big. It was a big deal for those of us in the city. It was a big deal nationally, globally, that kind of thing, because he was the first black mayor of the city of Chicago. Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King.
For me, it was Dr. King.
Martin Luther King.
I was very young when Dr. King was really making a difference on the national landscape. And I was then in college when Dr. King was killed. And I can say unequivocally that his leadership and the work that he did for civil rights had an impact that continues to impact my life today.
And I think the black people in our society today should really take a leaf out of his book.
In music, that's a hard one.
I would say Kendrick Lamar.
Kendrick Lamar, because he's making music that doesn't portray us all as shooters and killers.
I would say Beyonce.
Jay-Z.
So Nina Simone, Sarah Vaughan, Nancy Wilson.
George Clinton.
Bob Marley.
Well, Bob Marley is very important.
Totally a part of not just black culture, but American culture.
I think a significant African American in the field of performing would be Sidney Poitier.
I'm gonna have to say Sidney Poitier.
His legendary win of the Academy Award, the Oscar for Lilies of the Field, at a time when our country was in a significant uproar, culturally and racially speaking, is a huge accomplishment for a man of color.
I think Taraji P. Henson is significant to me.
Angela Bassett, Denzel Washington.
I love Denzel.
Oscar Micheaux.
Jackie Robinson.
And I don't think there's anybody more important than him in the early era. Let's say Walter Payton.
Pioneer, and he led the way for other black players.
LeBron James.
Big-time Hall of Famer.
Serena Williams.
Venus and Serena Williams.
She has won 4 majors. She's won the French Open, the Australian Open, the US Open, and it's one more.
Wimbledon.
She designs her own clothes, and she has homes in many different places over the world. And also she designs furniture.
I think the most significant black man or woman in dance is definitely Alvin Ailey.
In literature?
Maya Angelou.
Talk about beauty, strength, power.
She's a role model for a lot of people.
I'm thinking Ralph Ellison.
Ralph Ellison.
Toni Morrison.
Toni Morrison.
2 authors that just made me feel all kinds of ways and think about things in ways that I was not ready for and have appreciated since.
Carter G. Woodson.
Carter G. Woodson.
Carter G. Woodson was a black man in America.
Carter G. Woodson was a historian.
Carter G. Woodson was a historian.
In 1926, Carter G. Woodson helped establish Negro History Week.
It was observed during the 2nd week of February.
Because February 12th is the birthday of President Abraham Lincoln.
And February 14th is the birthday of social reformer Frederick Douglass.
50 years later.
50 years later, in 1976,
President Gerald Ford declared it Black History Month.
Black History Month.
100 years after the birth of Carter G. Woodson.
100 years after the birth of Carter G. Woodson.
100 years after the birth of Carter G. Woodson.
100 years after the birth of Carter G. Woodson. What? Drop the mic.
Yeah. Well, history is an argument. It's not simply a story, it's an argument.
But one thing to remember about history is that it's the story that other people are telling.
It's an argument that creates opportunities for people to exist.
If we don't acknowledge people's history, then how do we acknowledge them?
And if you don't argue into your existence, you will relegate yourself to being out of existence.
My grandmother used to say, if you don't know where you came from, you're doomed to go back to that same place.
Black and brown people around the world have made significant contributions to the history of the world. But the storytellers, those who have the power to create and write the story, oftentimes leave out the contributions of black and brown people and women.
I think it's critical that we all study black history, that we all study the history of all the peoples of this world and understand that no one race, no one peoples, it dominates human history. It's all humans who, coming together, have made this world and this life experience what it is today.
But it's important to do that and to study the histories of other people, because collectively we get to know who we are, where we come from. We get to know where other people have come from and their stories and their journeys, which are just as important as ours.
And so for that reason, we all as a people, regardless of your ethnicity, your racial makeup, your creed, what you believe in, need to know your history of your people, your ancestors. Whose shoulders are you standing upon to accomplish the things that you are accomplishing?
Because they bring change and made it so that white people and black people can be together.
Well, I just think everybody's important, and it's nice to acknowledge everybody and what they do.
It's important to acknowledge the human race, and it's important to acknowledge where do black people or white people come from.
Because everybody in some way, well, every ethnic group has contributed to history in some way or another.
I think it's important to acknowledge the history of any people because we belong to this country, and without knowing what made us, then how can we really belong to it? That's like having parents, but not knowing anything about them.
And I think as Americans, we should acknowledge everyone. And African Americans, we play a big part in this country. We built this country with our bare hands.
African Americans in this country have a story that needs to be heard that a lot of people wouldn't want to be learned about.
So African Americans have historically been marginalized in this society. Their story hasn't been told.
To give voice to those who have traditionally been held silent and marginalized.
I think black history is not just for black people, though. I think it's for everyone.
So black history is my history because I live where I do. And I don't just mean Evanston, I mean in this country.
I believe it's important to tell black history because so often it's left out of the narrative of American history.
As a white guy, I don't have personal black history, but black history has impacted me since I learned history.
I feel connected to black history when I'm here helping students at ETHS.
Anytime African American does something good for the world, like anything, I can be connected to.
Well, I guess listening to old songs back in the day, old hip hop, black cultural songs, and it makes me, feel good about myself or about black people.
I would name a moment where I felt connected to black history was in the 80s when Harold Washington was elected mayor of Chicago. I was in elementary school, and I remember his election, but I also remember the day that Harold Washington died. That was a really big day for me in 3rd grade as a young man.
A moment where I feel connected to black history would have to be when I was in 4th grade. We did a Black History Month ceremony. It was like right after Barack Obama got elected as the first black president. And it was beautiful. There were balloons in the auditorium ceiling, and everybody came out because we all knew what was happening. And it just felt like we were all together and connected.
Oh yeah, when Obama was elected, everybody was happy, and I was happy.
The moment where I felt like I was becoming part of Black history is when I actually got my dreadlocks because I was choosing not to conform.
Moments where I feel like I'm connected with Black history is like things like the Black Female Summit, like anything where it's like community involvement, like everybody's there, everybody's celebrating, everybody's like paying attention to one thing where we like join back together.
I think when we had the Black Women's Summit, I think that was my Black history because it was a moment for African American women to get together and talk about how we feel about Black history and, you know, certain situations that we've been through and just get connected with each other. And I think that's a really good thing that we should start doing more.
Beautiful. Okay, this is the last.
Last year we had a Black Male Summit and a Black Female Summit, and I was brought to tears by the opening ceremony, by the speakers who got up on the stage, by the young Black men and Black women's response to these positive images that were up on the stage before them. Music, poetry, mentoring, role modeling that adults were doing. And I just sensed an energy in the auditorium at that time that I had not felt in 7 years of having taught in this school.
When I started my teaching career, I taught in a school on the south side of Chicago where one of my young students, her name was Starkeisha Reed, she was unfortunately, her life was taken by a stray bullet. Our community came together, the Harper High School community, and Barack Obama was also there with a bunch of other leaders within that community, and we walked the streets of Inglewood together in unity, in solidarity, to show all of Inglewood that we would not tolerate this violence. And that's the piece of Black history that I personally feel connected to.
I was very young when Dr. King was really making a difference on the national landscape. And I was then in college when Dr. King was killed. And I can say unequivocally that his leadership and the work that he did for civil rights had an impact that continues to impact my life today.
I grew up in the 60s, and again, I was there. I remember the day Martin Luther King was killed.
The most significant moment in my memory is when I was in middle school and Dr. King was assassinated.
My mother and I were walking to the grocery store, and people were literally running in the streets screaming and crying.
I'll never forget the morning after his assassination when I went to school.
It was very traumatic for me as a child to see that and see the U.S. Army coming and, you know, the tanks rolling down the street. It was very scary.
I want to say Ferguson. And it's something that's been happening in history, and it's repeating itself, and it keeps repeating itself. And it's something that shouldn't be repeating itself. And I think that's situations like that, when it happens, I think we all come together. We all kind of try and embrace each other, but I think we should embrace each other regardless of situations like that and tragic situations.
So in reference to Black History Month, I think we need to know that, yes, we have a legacy of slavery, of oppression, of lynching in our country towards African Americans, but we also have a legacy of being kings and queens, of being landowners.
But if I think about individual Black people who have impacted my life, I can think back to kindergarten and preschool and individuals who were friends and who we started to negotiate what it meant to be racialized human beings together.
History is something that constantly rushes to the present.
All history is my history.
All history is my history.
Black history is my history.
Black history is my history.
So Black history is my history because
history is my story.
And our stories together make up our collective history, which prepares us again for the future.
I am history.
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 I'm Ada J. Lee.
Katora Miles.
Darlene Gordon.
My name is Marisha McCoy.
Matt Walsh.
I'm Missy Joseph Sr.
John Burnett.
So my name is Jay Johnson.
Yolanda Johnson.
Craig A. Johnson.
My name is Gene Dorellis.
Lenward Clark.
My name is Diamond Baker.
Mona Bates.
Nicole Parker English.
Dr. Anita Thawani Busio.
Dr. Carol Friedman.
Dr. Marcus Campbell.
Dr. Eric Witherspoon.
Dr. Kamasi Hill, history teacher at Evanston Township High School.
Carter G. Woodson was a historian, and he was definitely a part of the Black intelligentsia, as they would call it. And one of his most profound texts is The Miseducation of the Negro, which I find myself reading every once in a while, because a lot of the thoughts and the concepts that Dr. Woodson poses forth in that text are still real today, some almost a century later.
I am history.
Awesome. You're done.
Yeah, that was hard.